I don't know why we'd use it, but it's just to, so other people can listen to it later on. So good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our first webinar in our series that are going to be on the subject of integrity and teaching at the university. And so this morning we have Alyson King, who's one of the researchers in the PUPP being Partnership on the University Plagiarism Prevention. So Alyson is one of our co-researchers, and she's going to be giving the first talk this morning. Alyson has been teaching at Ontario Tech University since 2004. She has her PhD in the history of education, and she is looking specifically on how to make the student experience better at the university. Is that all right, Alyson?
Yep, that sounds good. So I'm an associate professor at Ontario Tech, and I'm an associate dean of undergraduate student experience as well. And I've been working on academic integrity issues for, it feels like, ever since I started teaching. So I guess I'll share my screen. So I'll start off. Okay, I hope everybody can see that. And then I also want to put something in the chat here. Okay. So as Martine said, this is the first in a series that's been being offered by PUPP. And so all the rest are in the new year. So I encourage you to take a look at all the upcoming webinars, because I think it's good that this one is offered first in a way, because it is something that is sort of foundational. You need to know how to deal with academic integrity when it comes up. But at the same time, you also want to, it is better to prevent plagiarism and things like that, so that you don't have to deal with it at any point in time. So you know who I am. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you from Ontario, Canada. As I said, I work at Ontario Tech University, which is located on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. It is a branch of the Greater Anishinaabeg Nation and is covered under the Williams Treaties. Now, my family is a settler family, some members of whom settled on Turtle Island, what we now call North America, in the early 18th and 19th century. Other members arrived later in the 20th century. And I recognize, I say all this because I really recognize that many generations of my family have benefited from colonialism and from the lands on which we now live. And so for settlers, the reason for doing this land acknowledgement is that it is one way to remember that a commitment to reconciliation involves recognizing how we who are settlers who have benefited from colonization. And so I do believe that recognition of the historic and contemporary rights of Indigenous peoples must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to making the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. And part of this process for me has been working to understand and embrace Indigenous knowledge and ways of being. And I'm still learning. This is quite a process. But one of the things that I've been thinking about is how these knowledge systems might inform things like academic integrity. And some universities, such as the University of Calgary, the University of Toronto, and some others, have been using Indigenous knowledge, such as the Seven Grandfathers' teachings, to inform their approach to academic integrity. And the teachings of the Seven Grandfathers, just for a little bit of context, is something that was given to the Anishinaabe people and are, quote, the values that demonstrate the interconnectedness of one's actions with the lived environment and also offer a way of understanding and being in our academic environment, end quote. As I've been working to learn about these Indigenous values and knowledge, I have found them to be very much rooted in good ways of doing and being, and so this presentation, it's not about how the seven grandfathers teachings inform academic integrity, but it is informed by those teachings, as well as those many years that I've had of dealing with issues of academic honesty. So I want to start with this question of why is academic integrity important? Then what do instructors need to know? And then we'll look at some case studies and have some discussion. I'm hoping this will be quite interactive. Now, we've been hearing increasingly reports of more and more students engaging in cheating in some form, especially during the pandemic. It was a concern even before the pandemic started. Whether it's due to the added stress and challenges of being online so much, or if it's simply easier to cheat when you're online, one report suggests that about a third of students have either witnessed or engaged in some form of cheating. So why should we care? I mean, it seems obvious we should care about how students are doing in our classroom. And at a minimum, we could argue that we should be role models. So we should be reinforcing the importance of ethical behavior. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here since all of you are here. So you are concerned. And we know, but it's important to recognize that not all students cheat. So we need to find that balance between reinforcing ethical behavior, treating those students fairly when some students get away with plagiarism and cheating, as well as dealing with or catching those who are cheating. So finding that balance without painting all students with the same negative brush. In terms of other reasons why we should care, well, we might want to care about the reputation of the university. If we're letting students get away with plagiarism and cheating, or if other members of the university community are engaging in plagiarism, then the reputation of the university is affected, which represents each of us. It affects our credibility as researchers ourselves. So, like I said, you probably all know this, but I'd like to repeat it just because it's easy to get caught up in the busyness of our classes and let things slide. So it's important to remember to remind students regularly about why integrity is important and how it relates to their future endeavors. Now, most of us are used to a worldview of education that is linear. It's fragmented, departmentalized. There's a department of everything. And Western knowledge systems tend to be individualistic rather than collectivist. And this means that we tend to be focused on how things impact me or you as individuals rather than our collective whole. And, this is the usual approach to understanding and teaching about academic integrity. And you can see in this flowchart, this is from my university, that the process of dealing with academic integrity violations is very linear. And there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with having it laid out in this way, because it does help us to make sure that we're doing everything we're supposed to do. But when we're dealing at an individual level with integrity issues, I think we need to do more than simply follow the rules and follow those procedures. That needs to be done, but I think as instructors, as individuals, we need to look critically at how we deal with things. I've mentioned a little bit about the seven grandfathers teachings. And in this perspective on teaching and learning, education is more like a circle or a spiral. Education is lifelong and holistic, it's relevant, respectful, and responsible. So rather than only seeing education from a semester to a semester or a grade to grade perspective, it's good to look at it in terms of lifelong learning. It's good to look at students' experiences of university as a collective whole, as opposed to one course at a time. So this is the medicine wheel, which demonstrates that holistic approach is centered around balance. So the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And I think this is an interesting way of thinking about our students when we're talking to them about integrity issues. And I mention it also because in my experience, one year I was teaching mostly first year courses, including one on professional writing, which happened in the first term. And then I had the exact same students in the second term where I wanted students to write an essay. And it was like they had never been in the writing course. And so this is why I think it's really important to remind students that what you learn in one class, one semester, you need to be applying in other courses. Some of them get it, but a lot of them don't. So Indigenous education paradigms are based around these sort of storytelling, where traditional instructions are embedded in stories that are told over and over again. So that repetition allows us to get different things about the stories depending on your stage of life. So what students learn in first year, they could learn the same thing in their third or fourth year, but it will mean something different to them. And so integrity issues is I think is part of this. It's teaching about integrity and ethics really should be following a similar model, I believe. So as you can tell, I do think we need to take an educative approach to dealing with issues of academic integrity and misconduct. It works at the prevention stage because, as I mentioned, we always want to prevent or reduce the opportunities for students to plagiarize or cheat, but it also works at the enforcement stage. So when you catch someone who has plagiarized. So every university is going to have its own policies about what constitutes academic misconduct and how to deal with it. And it's important for you to understand those regulations at your university. So I have a question. You can type something in the chat if you like, or you can open your mic. Do you personally report every type of plagiarism or misconduct that you see come across your desk? Or do you have some leeway for individual judgment? Martine, of course, says no, because the educative models tells you that maybe sometimes there's some types of things that happen that you could say, well, this isn't really intentional cheating. It is more, they didn't really understand what was going on and what they should do. So I do think, as I see a few people saying individual judgment is important, because it is. You know your students, you know what they've been taught, you know what you are teaching them. And so if you think you've missed something or they've missed something, then you want to be able to address it in an educative way, rather than just giving a penalty, right? So at my university, we are supposed to report every case of academic misconduct, but it's up to you to figure out, did academic misconduct actually occur, right? And that's where we have that individual judgment at that level, right? When you're a new instructor, and I know I did this when I was new, you might be tempted to let things slide because you want to give students a break. Especially, and this is probably especially true right now, with how tough things have been the last few years. But my question is, if you let a case of misconduct go without reporting it or without imposing a sanction of some sort, does the student learn that we take misconduct seriously? Or do they think that what they did is really not that bad and they will do it again? And Cynthia says, sometimes it depends. Sometimes the student will admit that they did it, and sometimes they won't. And if we don't have some kind of process in place, they will think that they got away with it. Some honest people, quote unquote honest, whatever that means, will say, yes, I get it. I'm not going to do it again. But we have to make sure that they know. So Emily's saying before our academic integrity awareness tool, we would tell them that we found Wikipedia references and tell them they have to try again. And I think it's important that all universities have some kind of tool like this. And I think more and more of them are. One of the reasons why we like to make sure that there's always as integrity offenses are getting reported is because if they become serial plagiarists and they do it in one class and then they do it in another class where you're not teaching and they do it in another class with yet another professor, we have no way of knowing. So reporting it gives them a record. And so one of the things that I do is I will tell the students up front, if you do it once, the report goes on record, but then it disappears. Nothing else happens unless you do it again. And so this is one of the things that I call this as one of the penalties. Reporting it is one of the consequences. And it ensures that you can make that we know whether or not there's serial plagiarism going on or cheating of some sort. So that first offense does not appear on a transcript or anywhere else. And so it's a light penalty in a way, right? It scares them a bit, but it doesn't affect them negatively in many ways. And yes, Bartine's saying that the reporting is a preventative tool. And I think that's true. And I think students talk to each other. So if they know that one person got reported, then they might not do it as a whole. So we want to make sure that that students know we take this seriously, but we also want them to know it's okay to make a mistake. It's up to them to become familiar with the rules about misconduct, but we know how hard it is to understand those rules. And we also know that students arrive with inconsistent knowledge and understanding of misconduct issues. So at my university, most first-year students take a writing course in which integrity issues are discussed. And this is a great first step, but it's not enough. They need to hear it. They need that repetition. They need to hear it over and over again. By third and fourth year, we often assume that students understand and know how to avoid misconduct, but there's always cases in the upper years, even among grad students. So if they don't learn how to avoid misconduct in the early years of the study, we can ask that question, are we setting them up for failure, right? And I think there needs to be consistency across your university and even amongst universities. And I think this is one of the things that this project will help with, because if students feel like it's not important, then they'll just keep doing it. And then we know that people get caught when they're out in the workforce and lose their jobs and things like that. So it does have this sort of long-term impact. So I put that link in the chat. This chart is in the Google folder that I shared with you. Doesn't look quite as pretty as it does on the slide. Oh, so Shiva's saying the problem with the UK is that we cannot make integrity or writing sessions compulsory. Interesting. We have a required first-year writing course that is required for all students in social science and humanities. And so it's a course, they get a credit for it. But it's not tied only to integrity, of course. So what this chart does is it lists different offenses, starting with the very basic, the very minimal offense, quote unquote. So things like citing incorrectly, which would be considered plagiarism, referencing incorrectly, missing citations or references, no citations, poor paraphrasing. All of these things are stuff that could be considered poor writing, but it's also considered plagiarism. And if you're on an academic integrity committee, you'll often see some professors like nail students for every little mistake, and they're really harsh. And others will let things go, and then the students never learn. So we want to find a balance between those two things, I think. And then, so the chart goes in progression of how serious it is, all the way, submitting an essay that the student didn't write, paying somebody to write their essay. And then there's the exam-based ones, talking during an exam, cheating on a midterm exam or a test, cheating on a final exam, bringing in not approved tools to assist you and things like that. And then the penalties can be seen in a similar kind of way, from the progression of the least severe to the most severe. But then the third column has these extenuating circumstances. So when I meet with students, I look at, is this their first offense? And are they in first year? Are they in the first semester, first year, the first assignment, right? That's a different case than somebody who's in their fourth year and doing their second or third offense, right? At our university, we also have a policy that if the assignment is worth 25% or less, and it's a first offense, you as the instructor can deal with it without the problem going to the academic integrity committee. If it's worth more than 25% or a final exam, or if it's a second or subsequent offense, then it must go to the academic integrity committee. So the examples that I'm going to give you are ones that have come to the academic integrity committee. We made these case studies to we mushed together a whole bunch of different examples and things like that. So you won't be able to know who did what. But this chart is what we take into consideration when we are meeting with students. So when we first identify possible plagiarism or types of misconduct, we tend to use the balance of probability in assessing the situation. So the balance of probability is based on clear and convincing evidence that it is more likely than not that the allegation is true. And this is a less demanding test than the criminal law test of beyond the reasonable doubt. So you're not in a criminal court where you have to have something beyond reasonable doubt. You can use that judgment that it's more likely than not that the student has done some form of plagiarism. And so when you meet with the student, I like to start the conversation with this question of, you know why you're here. Why don't you tell us what happened, right? So the student gets all the same information when they are asked to meet with the academic integrity committee. So they see what the report was, they get all of the information about what how the professor determined that this was probably academic misconduct. So we open it up with that open-ended question of asking, why are you here? What happened? And then we listen with empathy, of course, so hopefully we do. We certainly try to. And then we explain the problem to them. And we go through the actual case. We look at, depending on what they say, all of it depends on what they say. If they admit right off the bat that they did it and they apologize, that's good. We want to know that they understand what the problem is. If they don't, though, you explain it and you make sure that they understand where they went wrong. And you can explain how to avoid it in the future. So make recommendations to go to the writing center, things like that. Find out, do they understand what you're talking about? You can ask them questions related to that. But then the question is, what if they say, no, I didn't plagiarize? I've had one student, this is many, many years ago, who swore up and down that he didn't plagiarize, but turned it in, discovered that, or illustrated that they had taken 3 essays from the previous year and took a paragraph from one essay, a paragraph from another essay, and a paragraph from a third essay, and mashed it together to make it work. And, even in face of that, evidence, they swore up and down that they had not plagiarized. So what do you do with that? Well, you look at the evidence, you show them the evidence, the balance of probabilities would say that this is likely a case of plagiarism, right? So you weigh all of these things, you look at the chart, and you look at all the extenuating circumstances and so on. And you see if they understand. So this is the process we would do in an academic integrity hearing. We don't call it a hearing, a meeting, but I know some places they do call it a hearing, and it's very a rigid process. So any questions or thoughts at this point before we go into some of the case studies? Oh, Emily?
Hi.
Hi.
I could see this applying also to other situations, for example, of harassment. So what happens if the university adopts an attitude that's very punitive and goes into that mode, that very linear mode of saying that the student is guilty until proven innocent, especially you know, like some people have, you know, very firm law backgrounds, and they would be on these committees and they would say, okay, well, this is, you know, what happens. So how do you get over that hurdle of the university not necessarily valorizing its own values of academic integrity? So that's my question.
It's a good question. I don't have a definitive answer to it, of course, but I think it's, you know, my fear when you have something that is so rigid is that it discourages professors from reporting it, right? If you don't report it, the university is probably not going to know, right? So I do worry that by making it so rigid that professors will not report it. They'll deal with it on their own, and the students may get away with it going on. However, I will say that I know that at my university, different faculties tend to treat things differently. So you might have one faculty that is the same as you, where they're very rigid, and then my faculty that is very educative, and then everything in between. In my faculty, we do small subcommittees of the academic integrity committee to meet with the students. So only 2 professors will meet with the student, where in other faculties, it's the whole committee meets with one poor student. So it does feel like it's very judgmental. So what do? I think you have to advocate for an educative model. If you can't get that through, then I think it's important to really do the preventative model, like to really reinforce in classes how to avoid academic integrity so that people don't make mistakes. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's a tough question. Mahmoud? Oh, I think you're muted. Yeah, yes, I can hear you now.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for this valuable information. My question is, now I've been leading on academic integrity at Coventry University for the past 3 years. And what I think that's something that we have to work on in the sense of tackling the issue from happening to begin with, is that the life experiences of the student and what actually leads the students to commit plagiarism to begin with. Now, from the modest experience that I have had, a lot of students do it for various reasons. Some of it could be financial issues, health, family pressure, and now not knowing, I have a legal background, and we know that plagiarism is a strict liability offense. But that means intention doesn't really play a part in it. The fact that it has happened, and based on the balance of a probability test, there is a case of plagiarism. But my question is, do you have anything that has been tested that would help us identify these primary issues that lead to plagiarism, other than that we didn't know, such as things that are personal?
So I don't have that research right handy, but so one of in that folder that I gave you, there is a link to a study by Studiosity that demonstrates some of the issues that students are facing and the fact and why they are committing plagiarism or cheating. Martine, you might have some more references of, we can certainly provide that because that's something that we have looked at. We haven't collected that data ourselves in this particular project. But we know, I mean, there is a lot of research that shows all the different reasons why students plagiarize or cheat, and it is often because of the pressures. My university, we have an awful lot of students that are working sometimes full-time as well as trying to go to university full-time. So they really run into problems. So I think it is a serious issue that we need to be considering. So I don't have a good answer for that question either.
That's okay. That's all right. That's okay. Thank you.
Oh, so Shiva, what are you saying? You're saying that there is that information from Irene?
Yeah, I think he can contact Irene that she got some examples from the previous studies.
Yeah,
That's
this
Irene
is something that
Glendon.
we've been having a lot of chats about recently. Thank you. Thanks.
And you can contact Martine. Okay, so maybe we should spend some time with these case studies. So we'll send you off into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes, I think. How are we doing for time? 10 minutes. And how many breakout groups do we have, Martine? I forget.
We have 8, but I don't think I'm going to send that many people. We're not going to make 8. We'll probably make 4.
Okay, so there are 5 case studies. So you can pick one of the case studies and discuss it in your group. I get it's the case studies are in the links that I provided at the beginning. So what I'm thinking is that you can go into the group, you can browse that case study, and then think about what you would do. Do you agree with the finding that they had in the case study? Do you disagree? What would you do differently? Is it different for your university? And things like that. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay.
How do we choose our groups? Or are you assigning them?
Yeah, Martina's in the middle of assigning them. And I'll put the link again in a minute.
That was a very good case.
Was it good? Good.
We encounter it more often than not, you know?
Yeah. You guys were doing number 1, were you? Yeah. Good. And now, Angelina, you've been thinking a lot about the Indigenous academic integrity things. So
Darn. Mahmoud was mid-sentence.
Oh,
sorry, Mahmoud.
That's okay. I'll pass you my details. We can have a chat after this.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Is everybody back? I think everybody's back now. Oh, that's great. Thank you for doing this. Let me get my screen back up here if I can figure out how to do it. So we'll talk about these cases, or some of them anyway. I know we're going to run out of time. I think somebody did do case number 20. What were your thoughts on case number 20?
We agreed that it was a little bit bizarre how the professor had asked not to give any quotes, but to write everything in their own words. So, and we figured probably the student didn't know how to do this properly. And so that's why she got caught, but it was still a second time she got caught in the 2 years in the only 2 homeworks that she had to do, 2 essays that she had to write.
Yes.
So basically, the consensus was she would be forced to do, the consensus was it was plagiarism. She would be forced to do a methodology course before she continued her studies, and the consensus was not quite finished, but I think that she was going to fail that class as well.
Yeah.
So,
okay, that's great. And I mean, it's interesting what you said, that it's weird that you not allow students to use quotations. I do that in first year because what I want them to do is learn how to write in their own words. This wasn't my case. This is somebody, I learned this from somebody else. Because often when you get students in first year, they overuse quotes. So if you teach them how to do it without using quotes and teach them how to paraphrase, then in theory, they learn how to do it in their own words. But this then happens as well. So, any other thoughts on that? Did anybody else look at case number 20? I have a feeling most people looked at case number 1, but which is okay. All of these things are, based on judgment, right? Would you make the same decision that this particular committee did? It's going to depend on each individual group and the dynamics in each group. So case number 1, does somebody want to go first?
Yeah, I might go first.
Okay.
So I've read, I know that the focus was on one student here, but what I believe is that the fact that the other students allowed access to their paper when this, it was implied that this was an individual assessment, I believe. The fact that they allowed the other student access to their paper doesn't get them off the hook. They will be, although not equally responsible because the other student came clean, but they should face some sort of a lesser penalty. So that's how I thought that's what I thought that was missing out of the scenario.
Yeah. And I think that's a particular challenge, right? Because how do you deal with that, especially if the person admits, well, I just was showing them how I did it or something like that. Because on the one hand, we do encourage students to work together. There is evidence to say that students learn more when they work together, even if the assessment is itself meant to be an individual assessment. Emily?
Yes, I totally agree with you. And also too, it's not clear here what the instructions were for the assignment, if part of citing sources was one of the objectives, or even if the student knew, or like not copying, or I don't know, like we don't know if they were informed or not fully, or if the teacher's just being punitive.
Right. Right. And you raised that when I popped into your breakout group, I think you raised that question of how much, like, what kind of detail should be in assessments in terms of what are you required to have, what are you not required to have? Sometimes for myself, I don't necessarily have it in an individual assessment, but it is in the syllabus, and I do talk about it in class. All assignments should have, and then I might articulate it that way. But I think that's a good point, that you need to make sure that the students know what your expectations are in terms of to make sure that they don't plagiarize by accident. Anybody else have something to say about case one?
Okay. Alyson, just a quick, because I know you and I are in the same place. So I know that we have that in a template of the syllabus. I think it's part, but again, as you know, you and I know that the student won't be going all the way till page 24 of the syllabus. So I think, what you just said about, making sure that, and I know I agree with Emily about making sure in the assignment, there's some kind of a, I'm going to call it reminiscing, but I mean, reminder about because I don't think students are kind of, aware of everything that in the syllabus. And I know in particular when they're undergraduate year one, I'm sorry, but this is not their bedside reading. Sorry, Alyson.
Well, it feels like every time we add something new to policy at the university, our syllabi get longer and longer and longer. Emily, yeah.
Yeah, and just, our university has something called a help desk where the students can go and get tutoring, and sometimes they can even practice with a partner. And so we added a question in our awareness tool saying, this, you can go ahead and get help from your classmates, because I agree with you what you said about how it can be beneficial for them to work together and discuss things. But we said, you have to still say these things in your own words. You have to find your own voice. We were really focused in recent years. We had a really interesting invited professor who was saying, what is your voice? So even going along with what you said about the reconciliation movement, what is your voice? So there is no need to plagiarize if you're talking about, or you don't need to copy from other students too, if you're talking about your own experiences in the assignments, if you're, relating it back to yourself. So that was, one thing, so that, students knew how they could work together correctly, and then also how they can, improve on assignments, how they can work on assignments that don't put them at risk for plagiarism also.
Yes, and you were mentioning to me earlier about developing a tool that all students are required to do before they even have access to their course, their course websites, which is really interesting. At our university, we have tools, but it's up to the individual professor to actually make use of them. Julianne?
Yeah, I agree with Emily that, and I think that if you want each student to use their own word, it's also our responsibility to give them subjects so that they want to give their own word and not use the word of their friends. So we have to think about that too. In this case, what we didn't like so much in our group is that the student can resubmit another work. We think that maybe it would be better not give us 0, but give us some kind of penalty and evaluate the works she submit, but with penalty for the part that she copied of her friend. Because if she can submit another work, there is not a penalty, and she took responsibility. She said that she know that she did plagiarism, so it seemed a bit nice to her to not have a sanction at all.
And that's an issue of that we discuss all the time, is it fair to allow a student to resubmit an assignment? Right? So on the one hand, it's educative, and it feels like a penalty to me because they have to write a whole nother assignment. But is it fair to the other students that did it right the first time that this person gets a second kick at the can? So it is trying to find that balance. So sometimes we say a resubmission with a penalty, but you don't want to make the penalty so harsh that they don't want to do it, and then they still learn nothing. Anyway. We talk around about that all the time. Shiva, and I noticed that we're almost at time here. So
yeah,
Shiva.
Sorry, actually, what I wanted to tell you, I think Alyson, you have already covered it. I think according to our university policy, that most of the resubmission will have a ceiling of 40% penalty. So that is so they can resubmit, but the maximum they can gain is 40%.
40%, yeah. Yeah, something like that is usually good. Because the other thing about making one of the penalties a resubmission is that the professor now has to do more work because they have to mark the second submission. So it's like, how do we find that balance is the big question. So our time is up, unfortunately. We could talk about this for quite a long time. I did have some other, all these other cases are in that folder, so you can take a look at them if you like. And otherwise, I hope you'll come to one of the other the webinars. And I'll say thank you for coming.
Great. Thank you so
And
much.
Yes, and I'm going to say thank you very much, Alyson, for a very interesting first webinar on for PUPP. And I hope everybody will be there for the next webinar, which will be, I believe, in January, and will be Dr. Sarah Eaton from Calgary University. Thank you very much, Alyson, again. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank
Have a great
you.
rest of the day.
Bye.